Welcome to this crucial episode of Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable. I'm Dr. Dan Sheridan, host of Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable, and tonight we delve into a profoundly important conversation about HIV and AIDS education. This isn't just a health issue, it's a matter of social justice, equity, and community well-being. We're here to unravel why learning about HIV and AIDS is not just a necessity, but a right for students, especially those in high school, where relevant, real-world information can literally be a lifesaver. We'll explore effective educational strategies that go beyond outdated, ineffective policies and challenge heteronormative narratives. We have an impressive lineup of panelists who will share their expertise and insights throughout our discussion. Our Rainbow Roundtable will look at a historical overview of HIV and AIDS. We will discuss real-life experiences, examine tools and resources available for our students, and then look at our future. In our historical overview, it's essential to know how we got here. Our historical overview will trace the roots and evolution of HIV and AIDS from its emergence to current day. We'll look at events, decisions, and figures that have shaped the public health response and education regarding this epidemic. In our real-life experiences, we move to the heart of our discussion. We'll hear fictional yet realistic scenarios depicting a high school student's journey following potential exposure to HIV. These stories are paramount in showcasing the critical steps to take post-exposure and emphasize the vital role that education plays in such pivotal moments of young lives. In our Tools and Resources segment, we preach knowledge is power. We'll spotlight what's available right here in South Florida for HIV testing, as well as online resources that bolster or supplement school programs. We'll also discuss the significance of medication for pre-exposure and the impact of maintaining an undetectable viral load. In our future outlook, we'll discuss the collective action needed to achieve the ambitious goal of zero new HIV infections. We'll explore new technologies, medications, and community strategies that could revolutionize our approach to HIV prevention and education. We thank you for joining us on this journey today. Before we dive deeper into our discussions, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists and share a bit about their connection to today's theme. Let's welcome Harold Marrero. Harold is the COO of Safe Schools and executive producer of Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable on Happening Out Television Network. Welcome, Harold.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Let's welcome Tiffany Williams, the Director of Outreach for Safe Schools. Tiffany is also a pop culture guru and host of the streaming podcast, Tiffany Explains It All. Welcome, Tiffany.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here and have this discussion. I think it's really important to talk about the subject matter that we have ahead.
Absolutely. And let's welcome David Torres. He is a student at Miami Coral Park Senior High School. Welcome, David.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Danny.
And let's welcome Star Aditya, representing one of the world's most important advocacy organizations in HIV and AIDS prevention and treatment, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Welcome, Star.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. And finally, we'll welcome Christian McDonald, a PhD candidate at the University of Miami. Welcome, Christian.
Hey guys, welcome. Excited to be here.
Thank you for setting the stage with us. Before we can explore the present and the future of HIV and AIDS, we must delve into the complex tapestry of HIV and AIDS history, a journey marked by medical challenges, social stigmas, and extraordinary human resilience. Our exploration today is not just an academic exercise, it's a crucial step in understanding how the past shapes our present response to this ongoing epidemic. Our story begins in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when a mysterious illness began to surface. Initially dismissed as isolated incidents, the alarming rise in cases of rare infections and cancers among certain groups, especially gay men, intravenous drug users, and Haitian immigrants, signaled something far more sinister. The world was witnessing the dawn of the AIDS epidemic, but it had yet to understand or name it. It wasn't until 1981 that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention published a report about a rare lung infection seen in 5 young, previously healthy gay men in Los Angeles, an event often considered the official beginning of the AIDS epidemic. By 1983, scientists identified the human immunodeficiency virus as the cause of AIDS, demystifying the agent behind this relentless disease. As the 1980s progressed, HIV and AIDS exploded into a global crisis. It crossed borders and continents, affecting diverse populations. Unfortunately, the response was marred by stigma and discrimination, particularly among the LGBTQ+ community, drug users, and ethnic minorities. This prejudice not only hindered effective public health responses, but also ingrained deep societal misconceptions about the disease. The 1990s marked a turning point in the fight against HIV and AIDS. Activism, led by groups like ACT UP, was pivotal in advocating for faster drug approval processes and more research funding. The introduction of antiretroviral therapy in 1996 was a game changer, transforming HIV from a death sentence into a manageable chronic condition for many. As we entered the 21st century, the global community intensified efforts to tackle HIV and AIDS. Initiatives like the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, also known as PEPFAR, and the Global Fund brought unprecedented resources to the fight, significantly reducing HIV-related deaths and mother-to-child transmission rates worldwide. Yet, challenges persist. Access to treatment remains unequal, and specific populations continue to be disproportionately affected by HIV and AIDS. Social stigma, discrimination, and lack of education exacerbate these disparities, reminding us that our battle against HIV and AIDS is far from over. As we reflect on this history, it's clear that our journey has been marked by both heartbreak and hope. So to our panelists, what else can you add to this historical segment? Is there more that you can add to this history that we're discussing today?
I would love to add
Go for it.
Ryan White. And I think that Ryan White was very pivotal to the awareness and who could get HIV, and the sympathy that came with a teenager who was infected with HIV through through a blood transfusion. And that changed the face immediately, and it started to change hearts. But that was after a teenager had to deal with, that stigma and going to school and fighting for his life, and he did it very publicly. I'm from Indiana, so Ryan and I was around when we were trying to figure that out, and as a young child going, well, that's not fair. And well, if this is the information and if they can't spread HIV, then why can't they go to school? That changed my whole way of looking at how adults still, discriminate. And so it was very personal for me, because my mother worked for an organization, and the person who led it was HIV positive, and died of AIDS later. And this was early 80s, but it was something where I didn't know if I could hug him, but then as I, think about when I thought about the Ryan White and everything else, I was just like, there's a mismatch in what I'm seeing in the media, and hearing in the streets, and then seeing in real life.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it sucks that somebody like a teenager had to go through that to actually draw attention and awareness to the situation. Like you said, that you were young and that it was one of the first things that impacted you, right?
Yes.
I think that it shouldn't be that we let that something happens first for us to pay attention. It should be the second something happens, we should take notice and take charge against something such as prevalent as HIV, because we shouldn't have somebody as like a martyr to represent that we should make change. We should, the second something happens, start and strive for it.
And I love that you used the word martyr, because he was. And it wasn't until, later that then, when he was able to have, people who were coming to his aid, like Elton John, and Michael Jackson, who was also from Indiana, and Elizabeth Taylor, to go, hey, we're putting some power behind this child, but also with all of the people who are dying from this, and people are still being treated a certain way. So then it's like after in death, we go, oh, we could have done this better. But it was like, that's what we do with martyrs. It's like we vilify them, we persecute them, and then when they die, there's a foundation.
And it shouldn't ever be that way.
Yeah. And the fact is, when HIV started to affect the LGBTQ plus community, when it started to affect minorities, there should have been a movement in not just the medical field, but even in the response that the government would do to not just learn why the virus was affecting the certain communities, but learn how the virus was affecting the community, and done it in a way that did not vilify the people that it was affecting, that it didn't vilify the way that they were being affected, and that looked at it from a much more comprehensive way to see how we can stop it. Because much like, you can see similarities between when HIV first started and then how COVID started. We saw how the virus, which is like, it started and then we started to hear news reports and no one really understood what it was, but there were many points in time that we could have responded to it and not have what we saw, which was the spread of COVID that happened in this country. When HIV first started, if the government would have responded, if the medical field would have responded in a way that would have been better, a lot of people could have been better informed and a lot less suffering would have happened.
I think COVID was a great example, actually, because what we first did, we closed all of our doors and we isolated the people that were affected. That's exactly what happened when AIDS and HIV first started. And coincidentally, the minority groups like the LGBT community and the Haitian immigrants, my bad. Those were specifically the type of people that were seen like that they didn't want to be treated. Like nobody wanted to treat them. They wanted to exclude them, which was the problem at first. That was the very precipice of it all. That it was postponed so far because of a hatred that was already there.
Right.
I think that it's still relevant today, if you think about it, even in social media. And it's interesting that you made the comparison to COVID, because it is true. And it's so interesting that people in power who are mostly, let's be honest, like white older men, and they're the ones calling the shots, and yet the people who are suffering are, again, minorities, the LGBTQ plus, disability. And they're just like, well, that's not my problem. Like, it's like almost they're saying the quiet part out loud. They're literally saying, like, we don't care about these people. So we're just going to quietly let this kind of keep going, let this keep festering until it kind of just takes them out. That's literally what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting, too, because if you think about it, during the HIV and AIDS epidemic, there was no talk about safe sex, let's be honest. There was no such thing as that. And on top of that, you didn't talk about it because it was a taboo topic, And on top of that, there was also no safe sex for the LGBTQ plus youth at the time. So there's no protection. And again, I do agree that there should have been more emphasis from the government to kind of destigmatize that, because how quick is it to just say something and then someone tells it to another person, and slowly the thing that you said to that one person becomes a whole completely different subject matter to like the last person in the line. Mm-hmm. It's like a big game of telephone.
If they wanted to, they would. They would have.
Well, and I think, and the reason they didn't, and this was in our government, this was definitely pushed in media, which I'm sure was pushed by the government, to talk about it was a gay disease.
Yeah. Grid.
And it goes, and it was, I just remember watching daytime TV with my grandparents and seeing those topics and how it was like, it wasn't, well, here's the panelist, they're HIV positive. No, it was, these people are HIV positive and we don't know why, and it was definitely because you're gay.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's, going back to the whole idea of why and right, middle America, literally, white male, straight, and Christian.
Right.
And because it also became a thing about your moral values. We don't talk about sex because good Christian folks don't have sex until they're married, and
Right.
that's to procreate.
Right. And not to mention that, there were many spaces that the word "these people" wasn't even used. It's these perverts.
Right.
It wasn't even the fact that they were seeing the LGBTQ plus community as a, as a non-judgmental, number.
They weren't treating it with the kindness that
Exactly.
the situation deserved.
Exactly. They were like, oh, they almost deserve it because of their perverse lifestyle, because
Yes.
of who they are.
This is ordained.
Yeah, and when you talk about the African American or the African immigrants that were coming here, or the Haitian immigrants that are coming here, again, they don't care about those people. So why it's like whatever preconceived notion you have about that group, this is the reason why. Like, this is why they have that. This is why this is affecting that community, and that was really unfortunate, because I feel like this country could have done a much better job at stopping the spread and understanding the spread and containing it than what we did. And so many people suffered, and there were people that didn't have families. There were people that their families had shunned them. Their families had kicked them out of their house. And I always think about during this time, it's like how many young queer men died by themselves in hospitals, and how sad that must have been.
Yeah, I think it's a really important discussion to have, because I think you start with beginning the conversation with a name, right? And I think so much, like especially in the scientific community, when we have lectures on like HIV or other kind of viruses, or even conversations about where we are with vaccines and like therapeutics that we'll talk about a little bit later, like a lot of people are very unfamiliar with like the social, like historical perspective of how the advent of, the emergence of HIV is like pretty well known and well established. And, people know that history, but no one knows like what was going on, like kind of politically and socially at the time. And, like Dan had mentioned previously about like ACT UP and like these important movements that were occurring at the time that were instrumental in ensuring that we got the important therapeutics for individuals, right? And so I'm really glad that you started with that, because so much in science and in research that I've been involved in, like in those spaces, like that is not something that is like really talked about, right? It's more just about kind of the nitty gritty, what are the experiments we're running, what's been published already, how are we moving forward with this? But like names aren't really talked about, right? And obviously there's importance in maintaining anonymity in cohort studies and different in those kinds of designs, but we don't really think about as much as in the biomedical science community, where we're doing this to enhance therapies for people, right? Usually, though, it's kind of like that more macro kind of perspective is kind of lost, right? And you kind of get focused in so much on the science of it, right, and not the humanity of it, which is why we're doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I
Definitely.
think this is a great start to an awesome conversation, but we have to move forward. So as we wrap up this journey through the origins and history of HIV and AIDS, it's clear how far we've come and how much we still have to learn. This conversation has laid a strong foundation for understanding the complexity and impact of this epidemic. Now we'll transition to hearing fictional, real-life examples that mirror the experiences of those who have been directly affected by HIV and AIDS, bringing a more personal perspective to our discussion. Today, we bring to light the untold stories of struggle and resilience that paint the human face of the HIV and AIDS epidemic. Though fictional, these narratives are woven from the threads of real experiences, reflecting the diverse impacts of HIV and AIDS across different communities and times. We begin in the early 1980s in San Francisco. Mark, a young, vibrant artist in the heart of the city's burgeoning gay community, finds his world crumbling as friends fall ill to a mysterious disease. Faced with the lack of information and rising panic, Mark grapples with the fear of an unknown virus, the grief of losing close friends, and the sting of societal stigma. His story reflects the confusion and despair that marked the early days of the AIDS crisis. Fast forward to the 1990s in rural Indiana, we meet Emily, a single mother who contracts HIV through a blood transfusion. In her small, conservative town, the diagnosis is a death sentence, socially and emotionally. Shunned by her community and struggling to care for her young son, Emily's story highlights the isolation and discrimination faced by many living with HIV, particularly outside of major urban centers. Next, we visit New York City, where we find Alex, a passionate activist fighting for better treatment access during the late 1990s. Inspired by the loss of his partner to AIDS, Alex channels his grief into action, joining forces with advocacy groups like ACT UP. His journey underscores the critical role of activism in shaping public policy and healthcare responses to HIV and AIDS. Our final story brings us to the 2000s in Johannesburg, South Africa. Thabo, a teenager boy with HIV, navigates the challenges of adolescence compounded by his status. Despite advances in treatment, Thabo encounters both the physical struggles of managing a chronic condition and the persistent stigma surrounding HIV and AIDS, illustrating that even in the era of antiretroviral therapy, discrimination and misinformation persist. Each of these stories, while fictional, represents a tapestry of real experiences and challenges faced by individuals affected by HIV and AIDS over the decades. They remind us of the courage, pain, and resilience that define the human aspect of this epidemic. As we reflect on these narratives, I pose this question to our panelists. How do these diverse experiences inform our understanding of the ongoing fight against HIV and AIDS? And what steps can we take to address these unique challenges different communities face?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that you mentioned was access. And so I think, we'll talk later a bit about pre-exposure prophylaxis, right? But when we look at that kind of like as a case study of we have this incredible drug, right, which is extremely efficient at preventing viral replication in individuals. And it's just one pill a day, right? And then, we also have now an injection that people can take monthly. And there are advances in that kind of prophylaxis. But, given that we have this drug available, there's still a major problem that individuals, especially here in South Florida, are not using PrEP. And so a lot of it has to do, there are a number of different factors that deal with that, right? Both socioeconomic, as well as like biological features as well. But, Miami being one of the largest, we're kind of like the ground zero for new HIV infections in the United States. It's, very sad that we don't have individuals close to 90% using pre-exposure prophylaxis. And so I think, there are a lot of questions as to, what is a specific population within Miami? And so we have a lot of groups that are more disproportionately affected. So Black or African Americans, right, Hispanic, Latino individuals. And so how are we, one, educating? How are we also providing resources for them to be able to test? And testing is a really important aspect. A lot of individuals don't know that they have HIV, and that's been something that's pushed kind of nationally. And then we'll talk about that as well. But not only knowing your status, but also having access to these resources and adherence to it, which we can talk about later on as well too.
Yeah. I think it's so important to teach, the history of HIV. I was I think 3 or 4 years ago, there was an NPR article that spoke about the overall history of HIV and how they were able to trace it all the way back to the early 1900s. That it jumped from a chimp to human transmission through hunting, because in parts of Africa, especially in southeastern Cameroon, they eat monkey meat, and it jumped from a chimp to a human, and then because of our cities and we began to become more interconnected in the world, that's how the spreads really started first during that time. And when I heard that, when I listened to the article, I was like, wow, that really takes away the spookiness of the virus. Like it started from this flight attendant or whatever stories we might have heard. It's like now there is we can trace it to genetics. We can trace it that it was transmission from one species to the next, much like how people think the COVID started, which is from a bat or a wild animal to a human. That makes it less scary. It makes it less of something that God didn't do this. It's not a punishment. It's more like this is just the way it is. This is how science works. This is a natural occurrence in the world, and that to me is doing more of that, teaching people more of the origins, teaching people more of how things happen, takes away any of the stigma that we might still have around it.
The science behind it really does calm people down because, like, for example, how you were saying earlier, that, pretty sure it was you, that the AIDS and HIV was more of a thing that happened to people, and I think it might have been you. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Regardless, HIV was something that happened to this community, and just it's more of like that's their problem. But tracing it back to its own origin allows us for like us to be like, well, that could have happened to anybody. That this was preventable, but it just so happened to these people, and the science really does assist in like comforting that it's natural and it's human and it's like biology like supports it. So it's
right. And just also in terms of the different stories that we heard today, like it is important for us to see how all these different communities have been affected and what their response has been. And I'm so glad that you brought that up in the beginning, because putting a face to it, putting a person there takes it from a data set into this is an actual story of an individual. And it is unfortunate that when it comes to the queer community, like not only were we heavily affected, but we had to have gotten angry to then do something about it. And that's why, we started ACT UP and we started protesting. We started like, why, they're literally killing us. We're dying in hospitals and no one is doing anything about it. So I wish that we didn't get to that point. I wish we would have responded better, obviously, but that can also be a lesson in how we need to respond to these things. So the next time something like this happens, which it will happen, and we saw it with COVID, we have to respond quickly, right away, and get rid of any stigma that people might have of who's getting what and why they're getting it.
Star, I was wondering if you could speak from the AHF perspective about community-specific approaches, how we think about community work in terms of preventing HIV/AIDS or educating the community.
Yeah. So we have definitely different like arms here and arms there, legs there. So one of the things that we have are clinics that people can, and they're free clinics that people can get tested in. When I signed on to AHF, I loved that you could get HIV testing and then STI testing on the weekends in a thrift store. I'm a thrifter, and I was like, what? This is so cool. And this is so, like, because I work there now, but it's also like, this is normal.
Yeah.
Like, how normal is it to go shopping and then let me go get an HIV test? I know it's going to, take no time. And when I see clients and they come in and, they come in like every 3 months or, and it's just like, wow, like it creates a community.
Yes.
And also because AHF, the way that, our signs are, it's like, no judgmental bull or hook up with us or, things that you see and they go, well, what is that? I remember the first time I drove into Miami and I'm like, oh, that's where I work, hook up with us. Yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about sex. It's there. You're in Miami, let's go, But another, facet outside of like the actual clinics is our mobile clinics. And the fact that we go into neighborhoods, we go to events, AHF puts on events and sponsors different events in different communities to make sure that like we're seen. And when people come up to us, like, the shame goes away after you have like someone like me going, what's up? What brings you here? Right. You don't have to wear sunglasses. Everyone here had sex, it's like, it's okay, take away the stigma immediately. And it that's just good word of mouth, and then they know that, and I say, tell your friends, why won't you tell your friends? Because this should be normal, and normalizing the conversation. If I am at a burlesque show, which I was like 2 weeks ago, I was just saying all kinds of crazy stuff, and they go, oh yeah, well, this is, we're at a burlesque show, we're queer. Some of us might want to hook up later, like, I got condoms. I got dental dams. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, sure.
And I think the AHF is, they're cutting edge, and it's also like because I'm part of AHF, is like we believe in having these conversations and going to the places where people don't want to have the conversations.
Yeah.
And the fact that we consistently sit there in our vans talking to folks and getting them to come to test. They go, why? Why are you always here? And I was just like, the moment we find someone who's HIV positive is the moment we can get them into treatment. Yeah. And it's the moment that we can stop for that person from spreading HIV. Mm-hmm. Like, that's exciting to me.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I also love how it's not just about HIV. AHF has also done those cool posters and billboards about other STIs.
Yes.
There was one about a gonorrhea explosion or like a volcano.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool stuff. That
you're seeing gonorrhea on the bus stop.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, on the way here, I saw like 3 billboards of it. But I have another question though.
Yeah.
So as someone that, like, I've never tested, I've never done anything like.
Oh, yeah, you can come see me.
I mean, like, how would I go about like finding this, and like, what are my main question? What about like youth, like people like me, like underage, like what if, because it's gonna happen, people are gonna have sex. Mm-hmm. So for the for like preventative care, like if I show up to your clinic, how would that work out? Like it's okay if I'm 17, it's okay.
Absolutely.
Insurance, payment?
Yeah. And if you don't have insurance, we will figure that out too. We're there to treat you with cutting edge medicine, with, it doesn't matter if you don't have the ability to pay. We're going to figure it out. And you said underage, and then you said 17, and I'm like, oh, no. You're not underage to go to a clinic.
Facility. Yeah.
The youngest I've seen is 13 with their mom.
Wow.
And that's for, whatever. So, and that's, like I said, it's not only your age group that come in, but it's your age group that have a lot more information and are very good at asking questions. And I love it because it's like a 30-something that comes in, and, we could be bowed down with a whole bunch of stigma. Like I said, it's like the sunglasses, the hoods up.
Yeah.
I'm in the clinic, but please don't look at me. And it's like, it's all good. But at the end of the day, like, once again, it goes back to the fact that when you come in and you sit down and, the person that's on the other side is asking you, like, what are you here for? You sell them, and then you get tested, and that's it. And it's like the Insti test, by the time I prick your finger and put the Band-Aid on, I have a result for you, right? Wow. Like fun, like that's great. Know your status. Why? Because as soon as you're done and you go to your partner and you go, this is what I got. This is what's going on with me. And then you say, this is the clinic that I went to. You can go to that clinic too, and that's, and that's that word of mouth. And it goes back to like, just there's no stigma in that because we're having sex. And I would kind of like to know what's going on with you because I know what's going on with me before I make that. And there's that consent. And that goes back to like, the more we can talk about that and the more you feel comfortable talking about that, like with me, you'll feel comfortable talking that about to your partners.
I mean, if I were to see you, I would feel pretty comfortable. And just a second thing, for like the queer community, like those who are more ashamed and more like, obviously, like you said, like sunglasses, hoodie, what about like underage and like with parents? How would that situation work? Like someone that wouldn't tell their parents about, oh, hey, I had sex with this person, but like you're worried about something. How would you go about that situation? Like going to the clinic, would you need I assume you would need the parental consent for the
age of consent to go to the clinic. I know that you can be, I'm just going to say 17. I know that it's younger, but I'm just going to say if you're 17, you can go to the clinic without a parent. Get tested and get treated if you need to get treated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I also want to say that these are the conversations that when HF has things events, and when it comes down to like talking with parents and talking to aunties and cousins and everything else, that's the first thing I say. I was like, don't you have nephews? Don't you have someone else like younger to talk to? Because it's like, but my whole thing is lately teenagers talk to your seniors about sex, because it's, it's like, there's a huge spike right now with senior citizens, right? And HIV. And it's like, at the end of the day, it shows us where we are in sexuality and talking and being okay with talking about sex.
Yeah.
It's not okay when you're 17, 13, 45, 67, 80, So it's like, I think as a society, we just need to do a better job.
Right.
Yeah.
So
It's funny you mentioned that because like, in the 80s, right, having infection with HIV, right, and eventual progression to AIDS, right, was, essentially a death sentence, 1 to 2 years, right? You can see people, quickly deteriorating. But, now the problem that we have is that we have an aging HIV, population. And so there are a number of like questions and concerns that we have now for that, complications that arise, even living with a chronic condition like HIV. And so this brings about like, a lot of questions as to like, how are these people, being enrolled in studies, and how are these people like feeling comfortable, like going to the physician, talking about some of these problems, and again, having access, to equitable healthcare. And so, it's an important problem that we're having now that we have to be able to address in order to, eventually like be able to, reduce the amount of new HIV infections and prevent people that have, that are living with HIV to live, a more healthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
Christian, I think that's an excellent setup for the next segment. So I want to thank you all for sharing your thoughts on these powerful and deeply personal fictional stories. Each narrative sheds light on the diverse and profound ways HIV and AIDS has touched lives across the globe. As we move forward, let's shift our focus to the present, examining the modern tools and resources available in the ongoing fight against HIV and AIDS, and the crucial role of sexual education in preventing transmission. As we move forward, let's shift our focus to the present, examining the modern tools and resources available in the ongoing fight against HIV and AIDS, and the crucial role of sexual education in preventing transmission. Next, we delve into the cutting-edge medical tools and resources available in today's fight against HIV and AIDS, and we explore the pivotal role of comprehensive, honest sexual education in high schools. As we move forward, let's shift our focus to the present, examining the modern tools and resources available in the ongoing fight against HIV and AIDS, and the crucial role of sexual education in preventing transmission. Let's start by looking at the remarkable medical advances made in the battle against HIV and AIDS. From the introduction of antiretroviral therapy in the mid-1990s, which transformed HIV from a death sentence into a manageable chronic condition, to the latest developments in treatment and prevention, the progress has been truly groundbreaking. We see the evolution of treatment regimens, which are now more effective with fewer side effects and simpler dosing schedules. This has dramatically improved the quality of life for people living with HIV and significantly reduced the risk of HIV transmission. Another groundbreaking advancement is the development of pre-exposure prophylaxis, otherwise known as PrEP, and post-exposure prophylaxis, otherwise known as PEP. PrEP is a daily pill that, when taken consistently, can reduce the risk of getting HIV from sex by about 99%. PEP, on the other hand, is a short-term treatment for individuals who believe they've been recently exposed to HIV, significantly reducing the chance of seroconversion. Moreover, the ongoing research into an HIV vaccine offers a glimmer of hope for a future where HIV is no longer a global health threat. While we're not there yet, recent strides in vaccine research show promising results, bringing us closer to this goal. As we move forward, let's shift our focus to the present, examining the modern tools and resources available in the ongoing fight against HIV and AIDS, and the crucial role of sexual education in preventing transmission. We also recognize the importance of global access to these medical advancements. Organizations like the Global Fund and PEPFAR have been instrumental in making HIV treatment available in low and middle income countries, highlighting the need for a global response to this global issue. Now let's shift our focus to sexual education in high schools. In our pursuit to reach zero in HIV transmission, real-world, straightforward sexual education is non-negotiable. It's not just about teaching the biology of sex, but also about addressing safe sex practices, consent, and destigmatizing discussions around HIV and AIDS. Comprehensive sexual education plays a critical role in prevention. It empowers young people with the knowledge and tools they need to make informed decisions about their sexual health, reducing the risk of HIV transmissions and other sexually transmitted infections. However, the implementation of such education faces challenges, including cultural and political barriers. It requires a concerted effort from educators, health professionals, parents, and policymakers to ensure that young people receive accurate and age-appropriate information. As we explore these modern tools and the essential role of sexual education, we see a multifaceted approach in the fight against HIV and AIDS. It's clear that while we have made significant strides, there's still work to be done, especially in educating our youth. With this in mind, I turn to our panelists with this question. How can we better integrate these medical advancements and comprehensive sexual education into our global strategy to combat HIV and AIDS? And what are the key challenges we face in making this a reality? Who wants to go first?
I was going to say, like earlier, what Star was talking about of just having the conversation, of just talking about it, because at the end of the day, it's just who we are. You're going to love somebody and you want to be intimate with them. That is what it is. And having that conversation and getting tested and just taking out the stigma. Because let's be honest, in social media, what sells a product? Sex. And why? Because for the longest time, it's been a taboo thing. So it's like even more reason of like, oh, I must have it. But then it starts creating like this, almost like I want it so much and I don't care how I'm going to get it. So they'll go other routes instead of having a conversation. They'll just be like, oh, I'm just going to like force myself on you. And that's where we come into a lot of complications. And what you also mentioned earlier and saying like the age of consent, like, or age appropriate, where is that line? Because for some people it's really, they're a lot younger, and for some it's like later on in life. And so it's like, how do I word this? Because let's be honest, the internet is like at our fingertips. It's in our cell phones. We all have televisions. We all, have social media apps, and you could be scrolling on your For You page and then all of a sudden you see something really appropriate. You're like, whoa. And you have young kids who, like, when I was a kid, I didn't get my first cell phone until I was 15. And even then, there wasn't as much exposure to all these contexts of like sex. And then now you have all these parents that are like, oh, but I don't want my kid online because, I don't know what they're looking at. It's like, well, then if they see something and they come up to you and you're like, I saw this, and you kind of like put it under the rug because you're like, I don't want to have this conversation with my kid. It's like, but have that conversation, because if they're coming to you, they have the courage, because let's be honest, nobody wants to go to their parent and be like, hey, I saw this thing and it was like really sexual. And, no one wants to have the conversation, but it's like, we have to have the conversation. And the fact that they're at least coming up to you, they feel comfortable enough to come up to you and say like, hey, I'm curious about it. Not saying I'm going to do it, but it like caught my attention. And just being like, okay, you have as a parent, you kind of have to almost like swallow your pride a little bit and be like, okay, well, if you're intrigued by this, well, let me tell you what that is, how that happens, and blah, blah, blah. You have that talk about consent. You have that talk about safe sex. But if we keep putting this like cover over it, eventually they're just going to do it. They're going to do it, and they're going to figure it out themselves. And then that's where you have problems, and they don't understand that if you're going to do that, you got to be safe, or you have to get tested, even if you are safe, to still get tested, because you just never know.
Yeah, I found that out with my parents, because my parents told me when I was younger, when I was in 7th grade, that you can talk to me about anything you want. So I took it up. I'm like, okay, Mom. I asked her a very detailed sexual question, and my mom freaked out. And then I realized I couldn't talk to my mom about this anymore. But then my dad, he's a dentist. He decided to grab his book of different diseases that people get, and he scroll through all the pictures and it's like, this is everything you can get if you have sex. So I was exposed to people with sores, like all these different things in the genitals, in their mouth, and all these different places. And what that did is like, my mom was silent and my dad overcorrected with a sledgehammer, and I became afraid of sex. And for a long, and it's not even about that. You also had the whole, Cuban machismo social understanding that gay people are wrong, and if you're gay, you will get HIV. So I grew up with this to the point that when I was going to puberty and my bones were hurting because I was growing, I thought I had HIV just because I knew that I was gay. So therefore I was like, oh, this is it. Like I got it. And for a long time I had that fear that anything I did, I would get HIV. And I wasn't able to fully, those scenes of young people, especially straight young people, entering their teenage years, and enjoying their sexuality, or just like kissing someone and having sex for the first time, all that stuff. I couldn't enjoy it because I was so afraid to get something. That all my sexual encounters when I was younger and after I turned 18 were all very strange, weird. I felt guilty afterwards. Not guilty because of who I was, but guilty because what if I got something, And I didn't want to go get tested because of the fear of what if I did get something, and then what I'm going to do with myself. So all of that was just working inside of me, and it was really hard.
I think that's really how comprehensive sexual education could play a great part.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when people are against it, it's just because they assume as soon as you say something about sex, then you're promoting it. And it's not about promotion. It's about, just like taking a class and knowing what's going on with your body reproductively and, sexually, because it's a part of us. And as we, get older, we start to think about the risks, but that doesn't stop us from having sex, right? And so then it's like this risk, and then you just kind of get risky and go, well, forget it, because it's bound to happen. I hear that from clients a lot, which is just like, oh, you think that you're just gonna get it? And I said, no, and it's just like when people act like they don't plan to have sex, sometimes. And I'm like, are you kidding me? People plan all the time. You got dressed, you went out, you got on an app, and you planned it. So plan with a condom, plan by taking that PrEP pill, and think about what you want to do. Because now I'm starting to think about pleasure. Because how can not only can I have sex, but not have to have that guilt associated with it. Well, if I'm using a condom, and if I'm, having oral sex and I am using a dental dam, like I'm actually okay. And I'm not gonna think afterwards, I'm gonna have to go see my tester at AHF.
Right.
It's a different conversation. And I think the more of those kind of conversations, and then it goes back into if I go into pleasure, even in high school, I am going to have a little bit more autonomy over my body, because I'm going to say, I like that. I don't like that. I won't need alcohol because I know what I like and I know why we're here.
Right.
Right. So those are things that I think that when we have we do kind of have this risk around sex all the time. But people don't have sex because of risk. They have it because they want pleasure.
Right.
And I'm talking about obviously consensual sex.
Right. Mm-hmm. But even with, I have friends that I asked them, why didn't you get on PrEP? And their response was that their doctors were very much against PrEP. Like their family physician was very aggressive and judgy about PrEP. Almost like if you have PrEP, then obviously you are, whatever word you want to use to describe someone that likes to have sex or that wants to have sex. And that's very unfortunate, because we're not utilizing what we have right now.
Yeah, and I think also like, this idea of like sexual education, right, within our communities, and thinking about, Dan's question earlier about, how do we really bring all of these, different factors together to kind of like, reduce HIV infection and also like be able to find a cure. And I think ultimately we need, when we think about the infrastructure, like this top-down, right, effect, where if our political leaders, right, have these same different views, right, that's going to affect policies. And so like I'd like to give an example. Here in Miami, we have a lot of transmission through intravenous drug use, right? And so a number of years ago, physicians and public health experts were really pushing for a needle exchange program. Mm-hmm. And so ID Exchange is kind of like the program that we have now here in Miami. Kind of came about right from this concept. And so there was a lot of pushback, right, from political leaders because, right, one way that you could frame it is that I'm providing individuals with needles so they can, use drugs, right? But like from the, public health epidemiological world, right? Like there's this concept of like harm reduction, right? Exactly. And so the purpose is like, no, I'm giving people clean needles in order for them to like safely, use these substances to prevent HIV transmission, right? Mm-hmm. And so like, this question about substance abuse is like another health problem, right? But like we're trying to reduce transmission of HIV, right? Which will ultimately lead to all the goals that we have in public health, right? Especially here in Florida, where, like I mentioned before, South Florida is ground zero in the United States for new HIV transmission. And also we have a number, I think like 3 or 4 other in the top 20 cities in the country for HIV transmission just here in the state of Florida. And so like we need that support from political leaders in order to really reinforce, policies and create new policies to prevent transmission and provide people with education that, in a lot of places they don't have access to.
Mm-hmm. I think a good summary of it all would just be, if you're going to do anything, do it safely. Like, as you say, like with HIV, it's if you're going to have sex, like which you are at some point, do it safely and like prepared. And if you're going to use drugs, do it in the least harmful way possible, I guess, like to stop the spread of any intravenous diseases and things like that.
I am curious about your high school perspective of sex education in 2023. But what does it look like?
None.
No.
None.
Moving on.
No. I mean, it's always a thing at the beginning of the year. They make us sign that we consent to, like, since middle school, since like 6th grade, they've made us consent to it, but it never comes around. If the closest that we got was my 8th grade year when COVID hit. Was a week before we were supposed to start our thing, which I honestly didn't believe we were going to start it, to be honest. Nothing happened. In my 12 years of public high school, the closest that sexual education has come as a topic has been in 5th grade when my teacher took it as her responsibility to teach the young girls of our class about their periods that they were going to come up, and then the boys weren't allowed to learn about them. She moved us from the classroom and they gave us a pamphlet.
Wow.
So we didn't even learn about,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thankful for her in a sense because she took it as her responsibility to teach the young girls of our class, like my classmates. But at the same time, like, I think it would have been more productive to do it like inclusive everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's wild because we went to the same high school. I obviously graduated, but I remember that we started getting sex ed in 5th grade, and then 6th grade we got sex ed, 7th grade we got sex ed, 8th grade we got sex ed, and high school we would get all put into the auditorium, and they would teach us safe sex. That's and crazy. we had a freshman class, freshman leadership or something like that, freshman orientation class that we spent 3 months learning about safe sex practices across the board, including LGBTQ plus safe sex practices. I mean, it helped that my teacher was LGBTQ plus; he was a queer man, but we were taught this, and it was never a problem. There was nothing that no one came in and stopped it and said you can't do that. So it's crazy how much has changed in just a couple of decades that. This was okay, and then it became not okay, and now they're not even talking about it because of what? Some crazy, social backlash. I don't know.
But it's organized.
It is organized.
It's people who don't want comprehensive sex in schools, whether it's the parents or community. And I've sat in a couple of those school board meetings, and just the misinformation that is given to them, but they're organized, and I feel like parents who want this need to be just as organized.
Right.
And because I kept thinking, I was like, well, what if parents do opt out? What are the kids learning then? And that wasn't discussed. So I'm like, so you learn nothing, or like some of the curriculum, or none of it. Oh, I think at one point they said, well, what if a parent wanted to opt out to just this section of it? They hadn't discussed it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, these are kind of things that it's like, and I really would have loved to see more teenagers there to, go, not only do we want this, but we're talking about it.
Yeah.
And not just teenagers, middle schoolers, right? And, people who just want to learn about it and know the facts.
I mean, at my school, like what you're saying, that it should be like, you shouldn't like the opt-out thing, the aspect of that. We had a program that when I was a freshman, my first year of high school, it was upperclassmen teaching our freshmen, and they introduced topics like LGBTQ sex, and like what identities and sexualities, and they taught about heterosexual sex, and it was not part of the curriculum, but it was like a club that came to the freshman experience classes. Mm-hmm. And obviously like the parents had a sort of say in it because this was after the pandemic. A little bit of stuff changed after that. And so you can opt out of like certain things. And I thought it was a really cool thing to be part of. So I joined it as an upperclassman. But ever since the Don't Say Gay law in Florida, they removed it completely. Not even just LGBTQ safe sex practices or anything like that, just straight up the entirety of sex. And I think that's really that's unsettling. It's an entire generation, an entire class, grades, levels, everyone younger than me is not gonna have the opportunity to hear something like that. And it happened the year I finished my freshman year. It just ended completely. And I'm really surprised that you mentioned the auditorium thing, because they would never do that now. Like never.
Poor kids.
Like the furthest that we go in this, because it's an 8-module curriculum. We come like every 2 weeks to freshman experience classes. The furthest that they go with this is teaching consent. Mm-hmm. That's it. They don't use the word sex once in the entire of the 8 modules. But when I was a freshman, it was an entire module of its own, which is crazy to me how far back we went.
Yeah.
In 2 years.
I know.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And I think it's really important because it's interesting hearing your perspective from being in high school, your perspective from being in high school. And I'm like, I'm somewhere in the middle because I'm I'm a little older than you are, but I still remember, yes, around 5th grade of the same conversation of okay, the boys have to go to another side of the room and the girls have to have this really awkward conversation. And I think it was really interesting because I agree with you. I think it should have been everybody together, because then it destigmatizes also periods to boys. Yeah. And it's not ew, blood. It's listen, it is not as fun, trust me. It's no rainbows, sunshine, and it's not that, okay? It's not fun for me. I get it. It's not fun for you either. But it's just, again, there's just, it's almost you want to put the cloak and the mirror, the smoke, just to kind of the illusion. You don't need to know this. It's no, you need to know this, because if you are, straight, or you have a partner that does have a period, you're not going to be weirded out by it, you're but it's just, again, it's
50% of the population goes through something that maybe everyone should know about.
Yeah, exactly. And it's wild that, this younger generation, they don't get to have that conversation. They don't get to have even just the word itself. Again, it's like a smoke screen. It's we don't talk about that. And it's it's happening, but we don't talk about it. It's well, then we need to talk about it. And then I also agree with Star that there should be a lot more youth at those school board like meetings and being like, hey, like this is happening. Like we're actually doing these things. You're telling us not to do it, but we're still doing it anyway. It's like,
Yeah. And the youth are paying attention.
yeah, exactly.
Like every talk that you don't have about sex, and you know, when people are organizing, like kids are in the room when and they know they can tell when an adult, you know, starts to get cringy, you know, and now all the adults are really upset, and some are really upset, and we go, why? And then so not only do you not tell them about sex, you don't tell them why they can't talk about sex. You just leave them in the dark. And it's something that maybe they'll get to talk about later, but definitely not now. And not now meaning 4 years. That's a really strange like place to put children in, because these are now going to be adults who do the exact same thing.
Right.
Because their parents couldn't handle it. The adults around them couldn't handle the conversation. So they don't get to have one with the adults. They'll have them with themselves.
Absolutely. It raises a lot of questions for our future, which brings us to our next segment. So our discussion on the current tools and resources in combating HIV and AIDS, alongside the importance of comprehensive sexual education, underscores the progress we've made and the challenges that lie ahead. With these insights fresh in our minds, let's delve into our next segment. We'll explore the future outlook of HIV and AIDS, discussing upcoming advancements and the dangers of misinformation in an ever-evolving societal landscape. As we conclude our comprehensive dialogue on HIV and AIDS, we focus on the future, a horizon filled with promising innovations and significant challenges. In this segment, we'll explore what lies ahead in the battle against HIV and AIDS, the dangers of misinformation, and the shifting landscape of HIV infections. We start on a hopeful note, examining the latest advancements in the field. Researchers are tirelessly working on new therapies that could offer longer-lasting effects, potentially reducing the need for daily medication. We're also seeing promising developments in gene editing technologies like CRISPR, which might one day allow us to remove HIV from infected cells altogether. Another area of innovation is the ongoing pursuit of an effective HIV vaccine. While this has been a challenging endeavor, recent breakthroughs suggest that we are closer than ever to achieving this milestone. However, the journey ahead is not without its challenges. One of the most pressing issues is the rise in HIV infections among young people within the heterosexual community. This trend highlights the need for targeted prevention strategies and education efforts that resonate with these groups. The growing wave of science denial and misinformation is equally concerning, particularly on social media platforms. False information about HIV and AIDS can lead to stigma, discrimination, and poor health choices, ultimately undermining our efforts to control and eventually eradicate the virus. This trend poses a significant danger, as it can deter individuals from seeking testing, treatment, and preventive measures while also spreading fear and misconceptions about the virus and those living with it. The future of HIV and AIDS is not just a medical issue, but a societal one. It challenges us to strengthen our healthcare systems, invest in public health education, and bridge the gap between scientific advancements and public understanding. We also need to address the social determinants of health, such as poverty, inequality, and access to healthcare, which play a crucial role in the spread and treatment of HIV and AIDS. As we contemplate the road ahead, it's clear that our fight against HIV and AIDS must be multifaceted, embracing both scientific innovation and societal change. It's a battle that requires medical solutions, social understanding, and collaboration. So to our panelists, I pose this question. Given the evolving landscape of HIV and AIDS and the challenges posed by misinformation and changing infection patterns, what strategies should we adopt to ensure the progress in the next decade? And how can we effectively counter the spread of false information about HIV and AIDS?
I just have like this question. It's like, can you imagine if HIV would have hit us during this time of social media and how interconnected we are? Like we saw how COVID went from everybody taking it seriously to then just turning into this circus of misinformation. Imagine what that would have been like if we would have had this disease, this virus start spreading during this time. And how, I mean, I part of me wants to be hopeful and be like, well, maybe because we're so interconnected and there's less stigma that it would have been better. But I just feel like people would have gone through some crazy theories. And how, you know, and how, what can we do now to stop that? Because it's going to continue.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I don't know the answer to that.
I think especially if we're not going to be able to do it so much in schools, you know, finding those organizations that, and I know Planned Parenthood does it, but having those like outreach kind of like teach-ins and having more youth run things also, you know, as a way of employment, to talk to, you know, other youth. And like I said, I think that most people are afraid that once you start talking about it, that means that you're doing it, which we already know that that's not true. And so I think that the onus is on organizations that work in this field in public health to do more to teach-ins. We know that, you know, small little conversations work, because people feel intimate. And if there was like something that we could partner with in the library. Why? Because libraries have books and they have information, you know.
For now.
Right, I know. I was saying they have a lot of computers now too. So, but just that idea of, you know, each one teach one, because it's going to take us to do that kind of work. Because right now it's just not being done, and it's not being done at a large scale, you know. When I think about the DOH, and you know, all of the states that are saying, you know, let's end the epidemic, and I'm like, how if we're not having the like open conversations? Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about stigma. Let's talk about it openly.
Yeah.
And it's not so really quick, and not to go into like where it's just so deep, and then you have, you know, people who are going to talk about their trauma and they're doing this. No, we're just talking about basic facts.
Yeah.
You know, we can go into the other stuff, you know, and have some therapy involved or whatever. But I think that and the thing is because that those things do come up, and that's another reason people are afraid to talk about it. But then it's like, that's more reason to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. I could definitely say as the other part of my job of being the director of outreach for Safe Schools is that the kids that I have met, there is that need and they do want it. There's so little of them, and they are in like GSA clubs. And like, even then they're like, we can't even, you know, like GSA clubs, unfortunately, are right now, they're on the verge of like disappearing.
Yeah.
And it's even more terrifying. And I mean, I won't even lie, like even with my job, I'm like scared that some random child is going to see me and then they're going to tell their parent, they're like, I saw somebody with like some rainbows apparel and like a very questionable, you know, and then that parent tells the school and they're like, well, what's going on? You know, like, oh my gosh. And I do agree with you that we need to start including our youth in these community organizations. And I think like I've seen it, they want to do it. They just don't know how to. Mm-hmm. And it's, I've explained to them, and especially a lot of the youth, they're like, well, why haven't you as an organization done more? And I'm like, first off, I love that you're so passionate about the cause. I really do. But look, I'm only one adult, and I'm only like part of a community, and I work with other like group organizations as well. And, you know, and I'm very upfront with them, and I tell them what's going on. I tell them, I'm like, hey, listen, I'm in meetings every month with other groups, and we talk about these things, and this is what's going on in the legislation. And I tell them, I'm like, if you've got 5 people in charge, one person doesn't want to talk about it, then one person is for the cause, and then you have 3 more that are not for the cause, who's going to win out of the numbers is the 1 and the 3. So, and then the other thing I keep getting from them, they're like, well, everything's like, you know, everything's not going so great right now. You know, they're like, so why should I go vote? Why should I go? You know, I'm like, because of what's going on. If it bothers you, you have to start at the local level. You have to start doing the local stuff to see the bigger change down the road. And I think I get it. They want to see the change happen instantly. And I'm like, girl, me too. Me too. Me and everyone older than me also on the same boat. But we can't get there unless we start taking the baby steps, until we start doing the little steps. And I do think that there is a need for, especially these community organizations, to have more of a social media presence. Because let's be honest, like I said, everybody's on social media. And I know the youth are on TikTok like all the time. It's like the new form of news outlet, you know?
Yes.
And so, yes, is there still going to be misinformation? Of course there is. There has been misinformation since history.
Information started.
Yeah, since it was you were able to write it down and be like able to look back on it, you know? But to have these organizations that solely, like, their mission is to talk about safe sex, prevention of HIV and AIDS, you know, to do like small like segments, just conversations, just a place where I could go to these kids, and if they ask me, they're like, oh, like, I want to know more about this information. I'm like, well, here's the social media outlet for this organization that solely talks about that. And they can look at the plethora of videos and small segments and just having those discussions. And that's what they really want. They want to have that conversation, but they just don't know how to, or maybe they just don't know the whole story. So,
and this is where, like, I feel like the no nonsense approach is important. Like, don't put flowers in it. Don't try to spruce it up. Just talk about the facts. These are the facts. This is how it works. This is how it doesn't work. You know, just stick to the facts. And it's concerning that we're not doing that. And, you know, you talked about like how that you're scared sometimes about if a kid's gonna come and tell their parents. And it is insane that we're living in a world that a small percentage of the population is controlling what the entire population should be doing. And you talked about the school board. It's like, if you don't want sex education, like, either take your kids out of public school and put them in a private school that won't teach them, or like just bow out. But why should all parents have to do what you want to do because you're not comfortable with sexuality? That's wild.
Yeah, I think scientists like the research enterprise, right? Like, so much of it has been driven in understanding, right, HIV, which is without a question like the most well-studied infectious agent in like the history of like mankind. And with all that knowledge, so again, like thinking about PrEP, how so few people, or there's certain populations that don't have access to it and aren't using it, right? And so like right now, that's an idea that's really big that the NIH is pushing, and different governing bodies, right, in the United States that fund, right, research. This idea of like team science and interdisciplinary science, right? And so the idea is that, you know, these like scientists who are studying the virus and studying like immune response and different therapies, like Dana alluded to, like CRISPR and some of the other antibodies that are kind of out now in clinical trials, is that like this isn't sufficient, like to find a cure, because it's not so much about like the science as it is like we need behavioral scientists, we need people in the public health sector who understand the populations that are being affected in their specific communities, right? And so the approaches that we have here in Miami and South Florida are not going to be the same approaches that they may have in the Northeast or in other parts of the South, which are, again, more disproportionately affected than other parts in the United States. And I'll take it a step further where, like, globally, right, we see most HIV infections occurring in countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And so there's this bigger question of, like, the technologies that we have here, are they applicable in other countries around the world? And that's a major problem because, you know, obviously there's cost, right? You know, there's a lot of therapies that are expensive, even if they do end up working. How do we employ these therapies in certain kinds of contexts where maybe they don't have the same kind of resources that we do here in the United States? And so, like, there are a number of different people that need to be brought in, not just, right, again, from this kind of like basic science, like, you know, a vaccinologist or immunologist, to help answer that question. And so, like, there needs to be like a team of people both on the ground and like in the labs doing that work together to inform each other. And again, ideally would be like on a global scale too as well.
There's an interesting, I think, intersection between Christian and Tiffany around the idea of voting and politics, that so much government funding for NIH research and grants is motivated by political agendas, those in power. And it really raises a question as for students when they say, why should I vote? Well, research is funded so much by political values and what the government wants to prioritize in terms of funding efforts. And I'm wondering if that conversation has come up or you've been exposed to that in your education departments about how funding can be impacted in upcoming election years or political shifts.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the question that comes up, like as a grad student, right, you're worried about like, do I have funding in my lab to be able to pay for me in the next year for other people? And it definitely shifts. We've seen reduction in budget in different, so the NIH is organized in 12 different institutions, right? And so they each kind of govern different sectors in health. So we have like the National Cancer Institute, we have the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, where most of HIV would kind of come under. And so depending on kind of like the political climate, there's definitely conversations about, well, we may see a reduction in the research availability. And what that means for us is that, you have a number of different investigators, right? You have maybe more younger investigators that have like newer ideas and like different approaches, but because they don't have the same experience as kind of these like old, more tenure professors, they're less likely to kind of get this funding because there's like a pay line that you have to kind of reach. So it's basically you're shortening the financial pool for individuals and making it harder for them to get these grants. And so you have less people studying this and people kind of go out and they don't want to pursue this science anymore. And then you have less and less people kind of in the pool trying to bring in new information and new studies. So it's definitely a concern for sure, especially in the public sector.
Sorry, is that something that also AHF has to contend with? Do you receive government funding or how does that work?
I work in public health.
Okay.
I work in the clinics and do outreach.
Okay.
So that's like my scope. It's a nonprofit. It's a fun, so I know that we get Ryan White and things like that, but everything else, I'll just speak to public health division.
Yeah. But I do think, that's obviously right in this terms of the funding that we get does come from our political values. And if young folks disengage from politics, we lose a whole voice. We lose a whole segment. We lose a whole section. And when you said the kids say that, well, why should I vote when everything just sucks and it's going to continue to suck? It's like, yes, it might still continue to suck, but the more that, a certain generation is going to eventually either die off or let go of the reins of power, there's going to be a vacuum of power. We have to continue to push younger people, younger generations to go and fill in the vacuum, to vote, to show what they want, to tell us what they want to see. And voting is so important. It's so important. And I can't stress it enough. Like, you need to vote. You need to vote. It doesn't matter. There's only two parties, y'all. Like, just vote for the ones that are going to do the less damage to you and that are trying to do something better for the world, for the country, for the future. And don't think that just because you don't vote, like, nothing's going to happen. Yeah, it's going to happen. And you're going to get stuck with whatever you get stuck with.
Mm-hmm. People say that, like, why would I vote? Because it doesn't do anything. That's why you need to vote. That's it's like, duh. Obviously, go vote. That's right.
Yeah, and I just think, like, there is almost, I've seen this, and it's really fascinating, and I think there's just a lack of, I guess, a little bit of understanding and compassion from both sides. I hear from the older generation, like, I don't understand the younger generation. I don't understand how they, like, why they're so, like, crazy and radical. And then you have the youth that are like, oh, I don't understand the older generation. Like, they've been around the longest, and they know this has been going on. Why did they just let it happen? And I'm like, okay. Like, I think there's a commonality between the two, but I think they're so focused on their own issues, they're not willing to see each other on the other sides of, like, the discussion. And yeah, when my teens have asked me, they're like, oh, well, I don't know how long my GSA club is gonna keep running, and it's like they've already almost accepted this defeat. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, no, you have to keep fighting like this. Like, I understand, like, it's hard, especially now. It's like, instead of going forward like we should have been, where we were going from what we were hearing from you earlier from school, and it's like now we're going backwards. What was the change? What was the reason? And like, these teenagers, they're kind of like, they're scared because they've also seen, like, what happens on, like, social media. They've seen, like, firsthand experiences, or they've had their own experiences of going to protest. And asking and like not even asking, saying what they want and what they want to see in their future, and be violated, be assaulted, you know, being like treated horribly just for speaking out on their views. And some of these teens, like I've met them and they're like, my parents don't know I'm part of the LGBTQ plus. I have to lie to say I'm coming to this club, you know? And I'm just like, I know it's hard when you're in the closet. I know it's hard when you're kind of trying to keep yourself safe, you know? But the only way to have change is to come out and go into the light and be seen and be vocal. And I know it's scary, and especially if you're the first one to come out, you know? But if there are other people who have the same like mind as you do, they will follow you. There's always just like, someone has to kind of lead the charge to have everyone else kind of like band together and feel comfortable enough to be like, okay, we have a big enough group to now talk about this and like, you know, make noise about it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Like my school, 2 years ago we had a protest, but like it was the GSA that had the protest and everything like that, and it was like 100 plus members, 150 students showed up, but it was, I don't know how really effective it was because it was within the school, and it did good on social media. I'll give them that, but I don't really know like how effective it was, and like what are some ways that like as the GSA we can like, because I'm the president of my school's GSA, so how can we make sure that like our voices are actually being heard, or like what can we do to make sure that the GSA like means something in the school?
I think one is just making your presence be known, definitely in the schools. I think another thing is getting to know the other community organizations like Safe Schools. Not to plug in here, but you know, and finding those other community organizations, because I've even said this to my teens, and I've said this, I'm like, the most events that we have for marches, walks, stuff like that is during the summertime. You guys aren't in school, obviously. But if I can give you that information of like, okay, here's our organization, here's also the other organizations we work with, you have now a list of things. And if you follow our social media pages, you'll know when we have events. You know, I'm not going to say, you know, follow the newsletter because I know no teenager checks their email. I know you don't. But you will look at your Instagram.
I check my email a lot.
Oh, okay.
Like, a lot.
Correction.
Oh. And just knowing your local community organizations, even if it's just like you heard from a friend, like, oh yeah, I've heard from this organization name. And then you look it up. You have a cell phone. You can easily look up a name and just be like, oh, okay, and go searching. I think I understand how like that march or that walkout probably was like, it seemed like a big moment, but it wasn't really a big moment. But that's the thing. And what I said about it takes little steps. It may not seem like a big thing. And maybe, yeah, it did get a little bit of social media coverage. But imagine if there were schools across the board doing the exact same thing. Maybe not the same day, maybe like one school. Then you start seeing like a pattern that's going to get people's attention. They're like, well, why are all these schools like just kind of almost like taking turns of like walking out because of, you know, whatever reason they're walking out for?
I think that just to answer kind of quickly.
Final point, because we have to wrap up.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'll make it the point. Is that we have to organize. You have to, as you said, that there's GSAs in other schools, getting in contact and having events together.
That's
right.
We used to do that with Safe Schools, but we can't do that anymore, right? Because they I don't know, like if it's because of the school and all of these other things. I also know that you are a teenager, so there's going to be that part, where you don't have complete autonomy over what you can and cannot do because you're a minor. So, but thinking about like ways to find allies in other groups also, and when you have your list of demands or whatever it is, it's like, you use that one voice, and maybe that's the science club, maybe that's the debate club, maybe that's, some other group that's also, and the allies, right? Because we can't do anything with
because it's all of us, right? Because
Right.
as soon as
Yeah.
they mute GSA's voice, they can mute another voice, and you let them know about that too, right? And so there's ways to connect and keep that momentum, because there are no small actions. That when you just said students walked out and there was about 100 people, hurrah, right? Because dissent has to happen. If anything, at the end of any of this, when someone is doing wrong against you, it is your job to speak up. And if you can't speak up, maybe someone else next to you can speak up or whatever. But until you find your voice, like, just know that there's other people out there. And the thing is, because there is a GSA, you already have a group. Now it's trying to make that group bigger and that voice being heard, because there are no small actions.
I think that's a really good point. Go ahead.
That's a great takeaway point for this segment. So, exploring the future outlook of HIV and AIDS, along with the challenges posed by misinformation and changing societal attitudes, has given us much to consider. As we draw this week's Rainbow Roundtable to a close, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our insightful panelists. Your expertise, experiences, and perspectives have not only enlightened us, but have also highlighted the ongoing journey in the fight against HIV and AIDS. Now to our audience. Your engagement and interest in these critical conversations are what drives us forward. If you found value in our discussions, we encourage you to stay subscribed and stay connected with us. Your support is vital in continuing these essential dialogues. Safe Schools is more than just a platform. It's a community dedicated to protecting and educating queer youth, educators, and the diverse families that make up the fabric of America. We're committed to creating a safe, inclusive, and informed society, and we invite you to be part of this mission. There are numerous ways to get involved. Consider making a donation or volunteering at our events. Your financial contributions and talents are the lifeblood of our efforts, enabling us to do what we do best: educate, empower, and support. A special thank you goes to our sponsors, whose generosity and support have been instrumental in making this platform a reality. We're profoundly grateful to the Quadrachi Cabrera Family Foundation, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, the Florida AIDS Walk, and the Children's Trust of Miami. Your commitment to our cause is deeply appreciated. We also extend our gratitude to our partners at Happening Out television networks. Your collaboration helps us reach a wider audience, spreading awareness and fostering understanding. To everyone watching, remember that change starts with awareness and action. Whether it's through donating, volunteering, or simply sharing the knowledge you've gained today, every effort counts in building a more inclusive and informed society. Join us in our next Rainbow Roundtable as we continue to explore, discuss, and advocate for issues that matter. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and remember, your voice and actions can make a world of difference. Thank you, and see you next time on Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable.